Well, architectural tourism can be defined in many kind of ways. Actually, every tourist is dependent on the architecture of the city or the country or the countryside he's traveling to. So architecture can be explained in many different ways. Even a person who is not himself architect or architecture researcher can understand a lot about architecture, because architecture, on one hand, if it's a very sustainable and important architecture, it lasts many generations. All the other things like technology, like fashions you see, they come and go, but architecture is something that keeps for a long time. Especially in Athens, you can see that all the old buildings are telling a story of a long time ago. So architecture is something for everybody, from child to old person. The only thing you need is somebody to give you an access to it. Architects traveling is a very special kind of species. Architects traveling, they care about every detail. If they have a furniture, they look at every corner. If they have a wall, they look at the material. Is this real wood? They knock everything. They touch everything. And if they other people, ordinary people, let's say ordinary people, they don't know about architecture from this scientific point of view, so they can only feel the architecture. They can feel the silence, they can feel the emotion of a room, they can feel if something is not okay in a certain environment. For example, in China there's a long tradition, they call it feng shui. It's the balance in architecture, and this is something that everybody can understand of architecture. Although he doesn't know anything, he has no education of architecture, he can feel the space talking to him. I think the presence of architecture itself and the cityscape that is created by architecture is important to create a public arena, a public space where people can find together and where people feel safe. I think safety is a very important feature of architecture if we are talking about urban spaces. I don't mean the safety of having cameras or other kinds of things that bring safety. Safety is something that can be created by certain views you have, by certain situations of lights, by certain harmony, that even people who have maybe not that feeling like being at home in the city, suddenly they feel at home and they relax. So architecture can also be a part of creating a peaceful city. Oh, let me take World Exposition in Shanghai. It was the biggest World Exposition ever, and so far it will be the biggest World Exposition for the next decades at least. And architecture is not the main reason of this World Exposition. The main reason for a World Exposition or for other similar happenings is bringing people together, bringing culture together, bringing also promoting, making business. But architecture is a vehicle. Architecture is something that carries a message. For example, for the World Exposition in Shanghai, architecture was carrying the mood and the society of the host countries from all over the world, of the guest countries, sorry, from all over the world to the host country, China. So you could see countries like India or Pakistan who bring their native architecture to China, to this event, and you could see countries like Germany or Japan who bring a very modernist approach, or England, the most famous architecture, who even brought an art piece, not an architecture, so the boundaries are fluent. Other countries don't pay attention to architecture at all if they go to such an exhibition because they don't have the culture in their ministries to pay attention to architecture. But your question was more about any kind of events. So architecture, first of all, has to be useful for this. If a city doesn't provide the architecture for such an event, and architecture in this case also mean urban structure, like open public spaces where you can have open air cinema, where you can have concerts, where you can have an art exhibition. If architecture is not accessible to students, I remember when I was a student, I loved to use space. As a student, you are happy if someone tells to you, you can use this wall. Do what you want with it, and then you say, wow, yes, I want to use this wall. Yeah? And then it can enable the power and the creativity of people. Yeah. First of all, it's a big bonus for the inhabitants of the city, because their daily life goes on every day, and suddenly there is an invasion. People from wherever come and bring something new to them. Yeah? So they leave their traces in the city and they're gone. And then the inhabitants, they have to consider, oh, what happened here? Yeah? So it leaves something, value for the inhabitants. On the other hand, those people who are traveling for this event, who are visiting the city, especially for this event, and this is normal if you take, for example, an art fair, or if you take a concert, or something like a big exposition. It's the people who are visiting the city who learn about the city. So it's a big marketing factor. The city who is the host for such an event can benefit for years and years, also financially, with such kind of event. During a tour, okay, guiding architect. A guiding architect, everybody should be able to guide his hometown or the town he knows very well. But if an architect is guiding, of course, he pays special attention to the urban history, to the urban development, to the new architecture, and how it interacts with the inhabitants there. So when I'm doing a guided tour for visitors in Shanghai, or in Beijing, or other cities in China, or other cities I know, I will first of all focus on my audience. I will look what's their background, if it's kids or if it's grown-ups, if it's doctors, or and what do they know already. Yeah? First of all, you have to understand your audience, and then you start from their level of knowledge and from their social point of view. A visitor from America is very different to a visitor from China or from Russia or from Germany or wherever. So once you have the understanding about your group, which doesn't take a long time, this is a little small talk and interest in your group where you start. From once you know their level of interest, then you will bring them to the city as it lives, to the city with its soul. You will try to bring them as close as possible to the inhabitants of the city, to their daily life. How do they get up? How do they prepare their breakfast? How do they spend the morning? How do they have lunch with their colleagues after work? How is the whole day organized for a typical inhabitant of the city, for example? This is something interesting, but this is something more social. On the other hand, you will try to find the connection to the architecture. How does the architecture in the city represent their daily life? Why is the architecture designed like this? It could be a social reason, it could also be a financial reason. For example, every city has its decades. Athens has its, Shanghai has its, all the German cities I know, American cities, every city in the world has its. You have decades in every city that are poor, and you have rich decades. So every decade and every architecture creates different levels of social classes, and also this is part of your job as a guiding architect. And what's maybe most important, but this is only interesting for those people who are really interested in architecture. Other people could be bored by this information, is the architecture itself. The architecture itself means which architect Why has he built it? Who was the person who paid for the architecture? Very important. How was the relationship between the city, between the architect, between the person, the construction company and the owner? How is the whole project situated and organized? Yeah. I started very early. When I was a student, I was already teaching at the university. This happened because my generation, I'm 38 now, my generation was the first generation who learned to use the internet, who learned to use the public tools we have in this generation. The generations before, they were very settled. Yeah? They had to read their books, they had to travel somewhere, but I grew up with the internet. I even remember the internet before Google, and then we were happy when there suddenly was this company who helped us to find all the information. So nowadays a guiding architect is working in a different environment, because people can prepare themselves with a lot of information, but you can have many information. This will never replace the information and the feeling somebody can create who lives in a city where he's guiding. So actually I started guiding very early during studies, and then in Shanghai I recognized that most visitors from foreign countries don't understand the Chinese city. They know really nothing about Chinese society. They think China is still a communist country with a dictatorship and everything, and they don't understand that Shanghai is a very open-minded international city with a long British tradition, with a long French tradition, a long urban tradition, with a long tradition of being a free city. Doesn't matter which kind of political system is existing right now. And on the other hand, if you compare a guiding architect to a normal tourist guide will tell you, oh, look at this, this is very pink, this is very wooden, this is very white. This is just examples. Of course, a tourist guide will say this is very famous, this is very old. This is not the categories an architect and guiding architect would explain about a city, about its architecture. A guiding architect would explain the city and its architecture from the point of view how the city works, how the relationships within the city are. So if a foreign client comes to me, I will explain to him the city with its, first of all, critical point of view as a Western person. Because a Chinese person or a person that is not really that critical like a guiding architect should be, he will only mention the positive aspects of a city. But a guiding architect will mention both parts, the good part and the bad part that every building, every part of a city, every society has. So actually that's the benefit of being guided by a guiding architect, especially in Shanghai or in China, that you understand how is Chinese society organized apart from all the political problems.